decade, there's been an increase in honey spiked with syrups like rice and corn.
Food fraud for years and are struggling to compete with counterfeit prices.
To my mind, this is the biggest food fraud globally.
I used to think that this was real honey. I mean, why would I not? It says honey on the label. I bought this from the supermarket for just a couple of pounds, and there were even cheaper ones available to me if I wanted them that were also labeled as honey. But what I've learned recently is that this is almost certainly not 100% real honey. In fact, this is almost certainly some kind of contaminated, adulterated blend of honey type things, which is probably closer to sugar syrup masquerading as honey than actual real honey from bees. Products like this and pretty much any honey that you buy from the supermarket are products of honey fraud. A fraud that is so widespread, so ubiquitous with the entire industry that most of us consumers have no clue what actual honey even tastes like anymore. Most of us as consumers have been reconditioned to think of honey as just some overly sweet syrup, but that's not what real honey is. The more we consume of this fake honey, not only are we being cheated as consumers, but we are increasingly putting pressure on honest beekeepers to make their honey unrealistically cheap, driving them out of business. Foods that we're used to seeing, almonds, apples, even onions, on our supermarket shelves, they rely on beekeepers in order to be produced. And if we don't protect honest beekeepers from this flood of fake honey in our supermarkets, we could see huge price rises in all of these crops, or even see them disappear from the shelves altogether. So to find out more about this fake honey situation, I went to visit Sarah Wyndham-Lewis at Bermondsey Street Bees.
My name's Sarah Wyndham-Lewis and I'm a professional honey sommelier.
A local, genuine honey making business, and here's what I learned. So the first thing I learned from visiting Bermondsey Street Bees is that the process of making honey is really unbelievably simple. The bees do all the hard work. All you need to do in order to extract the honey from the hives is to take out the frames. You then uncap them using this spiky roller thing. You need to do this because when bees make real honey, they cap the cells where the honey is stored in order to keep it dry and preserved. So you need to use this roller thing to uncap those different cells so that you can extract the honey from within them. You then spin the frames in this centrifuge. It's a pretty simple device. And then out the bottom, you get honey. All you need to do then is just pass it through a mesh filter, and there you go. You have honey. Put that in a jar, take it home, and that's the real stuff. That is real, genuine honey. And this is the stuff that you get at the other end. This is the actual jar of honey that was given to me by Sarah and Dale when I went to visit them, the output of this process you just watched. So as you can tell, it's a very simple, straightforward, quick process, to be honest. And so you might be wondering, with such a simple process, how can it be that so much of our honey is fraudulent? Well, the main issue comes from the supply chain. While the process of going from hive to jar is very simple on a small scale, when you scale that up to the level of supermarkets and you introduce international supply chains, it turns out that that stuff that we're calling honey at the end has changed hands many different times, has changed jurisdictions many different times, and as Sarah explains, this gives opportunity for exploitation.
It's a product of one country, labelled for political reasons or because of embargoes, as a product of another country. It could have been sitting in a wharf through cycles of hot and cold. It's very far away from what we understand as the artisan production of honey. It goes through numerous pairs of hands, and in each of those pairs of hands there's the opportunity to adulterate it. Because you have this precious commodity, why wouldn't you pad it out with some special syrups which will be made for you, tailor-made, nature identical syrups, and suddenly you've got twice as much or 3 times as much of this product. And I'm afraid that what's happened is that people have understood honey to be a very cheap commodity. So when people talk about honey, they're not really talking about honey as I understand it, or as anybody who's a beekeeper understands it. They're talking about this very sugary substance which has been through really, really aggressive processing. So along the line, it's lost its integrity, it's lost its beauty, it's lost its nutritional value.
So that's why I say that stuff like this that comes from a supermarket probably isn't honey. It's probably a bunch of just sugar syrup in a bottle. But even if there weren't additional syrups and sugars introduced, which there probably were, but even if there weren't, the stuff that these international producers are putting into the jars and bottles technically isn't actually honey at all.
The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization has a policy document called the Codex Alimentarius, and everybody who is a signatory to that, which is most of the countries in the world, including China, has to observe those strictures and guidelines as to what makes a food. But it's very, very clear in the Codex Alimentarius what honey is. So honey is what comes from a sealed comb. So when the bees bring the nectar in from flowers, it's very wet, it's a very watery substance, maybe as much as 90% water. So they've got to reduce that down to about 18% before they can store it long term, because it cannot ferment. They do not want it to ferment. Honey and water equals whoosh, alcohol very, very quickly. So they will go to great lengths to reduce this watery substance into this very concentrated substance that is called honey, and they will cap it to keep it away from any air, any moisture, anything at all. At that stage it's a supersaturate of sugar, so within it, if there are any microbial life, will be held, and yeast particularly will be held absolutely static, and that's what honey is. Now the problem is that in this race to produce ever-increasing volumes of honey, I'm going to put it in inverted commas, the Chinese have taken to instructing people to take the frames off wet. So we have wet, which is unripened honey, and we have ripened honey, which is got a nice seal on it, like you saw today. So that wet honey is not honey. It's technically not honey.
And shilling these wet frames as real honey is not the only thing that these producers do in order to keep their costs down. When you see bottles like this being sold for just a couple of pounds in the supermarket, or sometimes you even see them being sold for less than £1 in the supermarket, you're wondering, well, how is that even possible? How can they sell a product so far below the cost of production? Well, the answer is probably some pretty unethical business practices.
A lot of this is being sold at below the cost of production. It's not the cost of production if you've got slave labour in developing countries chucking a lot of honey, a sort of honey, into the system. It's a very similar thing to the drug industry if you think about it. So it's you've got a sort of slave labour gathering of the raw product. It goes through all sorts of pairs of hands who may or may not cut that to bulk it out, and then it's sold at a really nice fat margin at the end of the day, because it's cost you nuppence to actually create that product. And as my husband's fond of saying, nobody wakes you up in the middle of the night and threatens to shoot you because you've been adulterating honey. Nobody's going to put handcuffs and drag you off to prison for adulterating honey.
And as I said up top, this fraudulent honey is putting beekeepers out of business in the UK, in the US, pretty much everywhere. And the result of that is going to be catastrophic on the food industry.
So a few years ago, I think it's in 2021, there is a co-op of European agricultural farming unions. So this sort of overarching thing called Copa-Cogeca. And they have been very, very active in prodding the EU Parliament to keep on testing honey, to keep on putting in, some sort of barriers to this flood of cheap honey. So they estimated that the loss to European agriculture would be around about 10 million hives. So that means that those of us who buy in a farmer's market, or you might go to a supermarket for some vegetables, and we're used to saying, oh, there's some fennel, there's some this, there's some that, those things will not be there if we don't have beekeepers. So the government's failure to protect its beekeepers in Britain is woeful. It really is woeful, and it will result in more and more and more beekeepers going out of business.
So if you don't want to support this fraudulent industry and potential slave labor that's going on in it, then you should stop buying fake honey. But how do you tell if the honey you're buying is fake? Well, the first thing you can do is to look at the label. If the label anywhere says the word blend, then that's not real honey. But it's often pretty hard to spot that word on the label because they make it so small.
You can look on the label, and I swear you need eyes like an eagle. If it says the word blend on it, you know that's a highly processed honey, because the actual process of blending is a big industrial thing. It's done by food scientists in factories. I'm just going to just show you something. Is your eyesight good?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's so small, isn't it? A blend of non-EU honey.
That is illegally small, but they can get round it because the cardboard box that holds those breakfast portion jars would have it. Nobody's going to read that. And once you get into the habit of really looking at the small print on the back of jars and squeezies, you suddenly realise how big the problem is.
And if you're still unsure what's in your cupboard, then you may have heard that there are at-home tests you can do. But unfortunately, Sarah says that all of these at-home tests are unreliable.
Or if you go online, there's all these things saying, oh, if you do this, you can tell whether it's real honey. If you can do that, there's one that involved a match and setting light to some honey in in a dish or something. And there's others about, does it float? Does it this? Does it that? And my response to those is, if any of those worked, we wouldn't have a multi-billion-pound industry that's trying to fight fraud.
So what should the honey industry do about it? Well, Sarah says that they should do something similar to what's happened with maple syrup.
Solution, if it's any solution at all, is to follow the line taken by the maple syrup industry. So in order to protect their producers, if you want to buy a maple-ish syrup for a very low price, it's labelled maple flavoured syrup. And then maple syrup is maple syrup. I would say that if we could reach an accommodation in that respect, so if people did want a low price, vaguely honey flavoured, sort of a thing that was sweet and was squeezy out of a bottle to put on, whatever, they can have that. I'm not saying people shouldn't have it. I'm just saying they should be able to, it's their right to know what they're buying. And then the proper honeys, the real honeys made by beekeepers from wherever they are. So each of those honeys is like a picture postcard of the terroir of that place. It tells the story of the soil and the climate and the producer. Those then remain the top end of the market, to which people can help themselves if they have the budget or they want to have a special honey and understand that it's not just going to be about just, oh, how sweet is it? That's really problematic, that commoditization of honey.
And if you want to start your journey as I have in rediscovering what real, genuine, delicious honey is like, then here's how you can buy real, genuine honey. Sarah says the key thing to do is to shorten the supply chain as much as possible. The further away you get from the producer of that honey and their hives, the more likely it is that there's going to be someone who has interposed in that supply chain and contaminated the honey that you're buying. So if possible, go to your local farmer's market and talk to the owners there. Where do they buy their honey from? If it's not on the jar, ask them where they are. They should be able to tell you, and if they can tell you, great, that's real honey. Occasionally, local shops, maybe even the local post office, might stock genuine honey because there's a real beekeeper down the road. Or if you know of a local beekeeper, go and buy their honey because you know that stuff is genuine, it's coming from their own hive. And as a consumerist society, I think we need to readjust our evaluations of what honey, genuine, real honey is. It is a luxury product. It takes an incredible amount of work and labor on part of the bees and the beekeepers in order to make even a small amount of honey. And so the idea of buying a bottle, this size for a couple of pounds or even 85p is absolutely absurd. So, adjust your expectations. Yes, this stuff that you're buying from the farmer's market or this stuff that you're buying from a local producer is going to be more expensive, but it's also going to be so much more delicious, so much more complex in its flavor. And of course, it's going to be actually supporting real beekeepers and not supporting this terrible, fraudulent industry. So I encourage you to go and find your own local, genuine honey so that you can enjoy real, delicious, nutritious, and ethical honey yourself.
The further away you get from the actual production of that honey to the point of sale or point of consumption, the more risk you are looking at in terms of that not being the right thing.
I want to end this video by saying a huge thank you to Sarah, Dale, and Pavlin at Bermondsey Street Bees for showing me around their business and helping me with this video. If you want to check them out, I have a link to their website in the description, as well as some links to Sarah's books on bees and honey making. I hope you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up down below because it really helps me out. And I will see you all in the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.